For general sewists and crafters, there can be a lot of mystique around the word quilting, but there is no reason to be afraid. Piecing and quilting are great ways to use up your fabric scraps, and there are so many projects you can make beyond quilts. Let's cover some basics and then get to some fun experiments with our super lovely guest, Quilt Tell Podcast host, Ginger Sheehy Tatic. Hi, I'm Amanda Carestio.
I'm Kate Zeinard.
And I'm Meg Healy.
We are the hosts of the Sew and Tell podcast, and we are very excited to start a new series for you called Stitch Lab. In each episode, we are going to cover essential techniques and present inspiring experiments.
I need to put my safety glasses on for this experiment.
Aha.
Oh, great! Wonderful! That was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
Wow!
Welcome to Stitch Lab. We're so lucky to have a very special guest with us today, Ginger Sheehy Tatic. Ginger, hey there.
Hi there.
It's good to see you guys. Tell us a little bit about how you got your start with quilting and sewing.
Well, it started out about 5 years ago, so I haven't been quilting too long, but I dove in deep. And I was given a machine just to borrow over the weekend one time from my fellow podcast host. I'm the host of the Quilt Tell Podcast, you guys' sister podcast,
right?
Lori Baker, and she had actually just loaned me a machine, and she also gave me this amazing Kiss, the band Kiss.
Oh, yeah.
It was fabric. That was a
Oh, my
panel
gosh.
of
That's
all of the
awesome.
band members. It was amazing. So between the free machine and the free fabric, I was hooked, and it was great. So that kind of took me down that path, and I've been quilting ever since.
Terrific. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the essential techniques for piecing and quilting. One of the things that I do love about piecing, and we're seeing a lot of kind of general sewists and garment sewists taking this up now, is using up your scraps to create pieced things, whether that's a bag or a garment or a coat. You can really do a lot with that technique, and that's something I actually have had a lot of fun with recently. And it's just pieces kind of blocked together from other garments that I've made. So there's little memories built in with each of these fabrics, which I also kind of love. Now this is just pieced. I actually seamed these together on my serger and then just pressed the seams to one side, but it is not quilted. So Ginger, I was wondering if you could talk us through a little bit about the difference there.
Oh yeah, I can definitely talk with you about that. Okay, so it's so funny how many people don't realize what quilting actually is. All it is literally taking two pieces of fabric, you put some batting in between, and then you sew them all together. So the actual quilting part is when you sew it down together. So until you do that, it's not really a quilt.
Right.
You know, just a quick little example here. I've got this one, and you'll notice that I have got, this is what's called matchstick quilting, and it's not a quick process.
Right.
I love the way that it looks. Like, it's
Me
just
too.
really fun. So all you're doing is just straight lines, straight through, and I'm a huge curved piecing fan, so these are curved pieces here. If you look in the back here, you'll notice I've got my backing. You know, and look how that quilting shows up,
Yes.
especially with the solid background. And then in between, I've got my batting, and then you've got your front. So speaking of batting, here, if you want to set that one
I
over
will.
there, I've got just two different types of batting here, because that really does make a big difference when you are quilting. I've got this one, which is pretty standard. It's just straight cotton. Feel it, it's super soft.
Oh, yeah.
I get a little obsessed feeling batting.
Yeah.
Just touchy-feely between fabric and batting. And then this right here is actually polyester. And so, first of all, you can see the loft. And go ahead and feel that one, too.
Yeah, it's a little squishier.
And it really does give, you know, with that quilt that I showed you, that was just with the plain cotton batting. And I chose that on purpose because I didn't want it to really pop out.
Yeah,
I wanted it to be nice and flat and beautiful. So making those decisions is really a big part of quilting. So, but that's all it is that's just what the quilting is.
Awesome. And there are a few special tools that you need, is that right? For the
correct.
quilting process specifically?
Yep. And so I've got a couple here just to show you, because one of the biggest things you want to do is you have to, what's called basting. So, and it's called a quilt sandwich, so you can start drooling now. It's all delicious. So when you do your quilting, you want to, you know, you got to put all those pieces together, and you want them to stay together. So there's so many fun options that you can do. We have these cool pins here, and these are great for when we do the binding of your quilt. So we'll hold on to that for a little bit, and we'll wait and use those.
Yep.
But when you're actually quilting it, you've got these pins here. And that's kind of old school. But these are like literally like, okay, they'll do in a pinch.
And much better than using straight pins. Because I have tried that before, and you just end up catching yourself. And
lots of owies.
And bleeding a little bit. It's no good.
And then we've got these nice cool ones here. These are the Wonder Clips. And then you got your basting spray. So these are great because you can spray this on. You lay down your batting, lift up your quilt top, and then just spray. And then the same with the quilting, the fuse free. This right here, it's powder that you sprinkle on, and then you just iron it down. And then you iron those down too. So lots of fun ways to kind of just keep that quilt together. And then you have what Kate has here. These are all the other really fun tools.
So when you're doing your piecing, you often need a bunch of very straight lines. And the easiest way to cut those is with a rotary cutter. You take a rotary cutting mat, you take a nice thick ruler, and you put your fabric under there, and then you just cut along the edge of the ruler, and you get these nice, beautiful straight lines. And as you can see, this mat has all these beautiful grid marks on it to help you get your measurements really precise. Super useful when quilting, but it can also be really useful when you're garment sewing, especially when you take the little one. I think this is a 28 millimeter.
I think so.
And these are really great for going around curves, like doing your arm's eye curve and stuff like that.
And I had never even thought about using one for garment sewing until I met you ladies. And it was like opened up a whole new world.
That's pretty much all I use.
Yep.
I had never either until Amanda taught me. So we just all credit it to Amanda.
Okay.
Nice.
I'll take.
And the other thing is quilt blocks.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of more improv piecing, which is definitely kind of my speed. I don't like playing by the rules. These are just kind of takes on a really basic log cabin block. You just kind of build these from the inside out, have fun. Again, this is a really great technique for using up some of your smaller fabric scraps. Let's get started with the experiments. We are going to be covering a lot of ground today. We're going to do a little bit of stitch in the ditch quilting. We're going to do some simple piecing just to show how that process works. And then we're going to cover mitered corners. So let's get rolling with that.
Yeah, we got a lot to do.
All right, let's kick off these experiments.
Yes,
All
let's do it.
right.
We got our jackets.
We
I feel
do.
so official.
We're ready. All right, one of the things that's a bit different about piecing, if you are used to doing other kinds of sewing, garment sewing and bag sewing, is that you're going to be dealing with a much smaller seam allowance, and that is to reduce bulk in those seams. So you are going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Actually, there's a bunch of different feet that you can use for this. You can just use your standard foot. You just want to kick that needle over a little bit and make sure you're hitting that 1/4 inch. There's also a patchwork foot that has that 1/4 inch seam allowance built right in. It's awesome. And I'm actually going to use this straight stitch foot here. And you can kind of double check if you need to, but that's right on that 1/4 inch mark. So that's perfect. You'll also notice that there's a really small hole for that needle. So when you're using this foot, you want to make sure that you're not moving your needle to the left and right. Otherwise, you're going to strike that, and it's not going to be good.
Many a needle.
Exactly. Me too. Speaking from experience.
Move it over just a smidge.
All right, so I'm going to pop this on the machine, and I've just got this set up for a straight stitch, just a standard length. And I've got my 5-inch squares pinned together here, and I'm just going to run them through the machine, just lining up right next to the edge of that foot.
And I mean, getting that 1/4 inch is super important because it's really going to help when you're piecing it together. It's going to make your blocks all even. And if you're a 1/2 inch on one and only a 1/4 inch on another, your blocks are going to turn out really bad. So it is really important. Oh, look what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit of chain piecing. If you've got a bunch of little units that you're stitching together, just do them right in a row, and then you can cut them apart later.
Yeah, and it really saves on thread.
Thread and time.
Yes,
and time.
Exactly. And then you get a fun little flag at the end.
The other fun thing is that when you're doing this, you don't actually have to backstitch at the start and stop as you would if you were doing
That's right.
Garment or bag sewing, because you're going to actually secure those seams later. Okay, I've got these 2 units completed, and Ginger, you're going to show me how to press these, because that is a little bit different from, again, bag sewing and garment sewing.
Yes, it's a whole new vocabulary, because what you want to do is, we're doing this so we can nest our seams. And yet again, it's just to get rid of that bulk. You know, it's why we use a 1/4 inch. It's why we do this. You'll want it to be nice and flat. So the way you've got this, we'll flip them over, and I'm going to put them over here. You can be my official presser.
All right.
All right, so we've got our seams sticking up here. The key to this is you have 2 different ways you can do it. You can either open up your seams and just right down the middle and do that on both, or you can do one going to one side and one going to the other. So let's do that. So I'm going to have you do this one, and I'm going to have you do it over to that side.
All right. And then the other one we're going to do this way, right?
You are. And another key is when you have dark and light fabric, I always suggest trying to do it to the darker side, not the lighter side, because you'll get bleed through on the front and you'll kind of see that little seam. Sometimes it's inevitable and you can't avoid it just because of the way the design is. But remember, go to the dark side.
There are two with the seam allowances going in two different directions.
All right.
Now, let's see how this nesting thing works.
I'm going to let you show how to do
All
that.
right, awesome. So we are going to put these two strips together with right sides facing, and we're just going to try to line up that seam as best we can. You want to really get it kind of straight on. And as you can see, I've got this seam allowance going this direction and opposite direction over here, so that join right there won't get super bulky and it'll press nice and flat later on when we've got the quilt top finished.
And it kind of fits together like a puzzle piece and helps you match those corners together.
Exactly, it does.
Yep.
So those are a few of the special considerations that you want to keep in mind when you're doing piecing. It's a little bit different, but it's essentially the same process as most of your general sewing, just making use of that nice straight stitch.
Yep.
All right.
Let's get to some quilting.
Okay, I'm ready.
So we talked a little bit about some of the decorative quilting that you can do, but sometimes you don't want your quilting taking away from your piecing, or when you're doing sort of bags or apparel, sometimes you don't want to have that really obvious quilting. So that's when you stitch in the ditch. Now this is a technique that you know about if you do very much garment sewing, because it happens a lot on waistbands and various other things like that. But we're just going to do it real quick on this quilt sandwich I made. So I've got my front and my back and my batting in between and held together with some pins, and I'm going to take my walking foot. So the walking foot has feed dogs basically on the top, so it moves the fabric through super evenly, which is great when you're doing multiple layers. And I'm just going to stitch right along my seam here, and hopefully you won't even be able to see it.
That's the idea.
Yes, we'll find out.
So I find this to be one of the more difficult ways to quilt, because it's really hard to kind of stay straight in that. And she's brave. She's got the bold, bright thread. I would probably tend to use more something that would not necessarily show, if you happen to bobble a little. But you're very brave, Kate.
Thank you. Well, I figured except for one of the spots here, there's just enough red that it's going to blend in fairly well. So I'm actually not nearly as brave as you think I am.
It's a good choice. It was a good color choice.
So I think I did pretty well. You really can't even see it.
You can't.
But if you flip on the back, you
Yep.
can see that
Sure
stitching
enough.
line. So I did, in fact, actually have thread in my machine while I was doing that. So yeah, the walking foot is great for this. There's also such thing as a stitch in the ditch foot, which helps you run right along that edge. But it's a great way to do your quilting without disrupting your pattern.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so once you have decided what quilting technique you're going to use and you've actually quilted your quilt, let's talk a little bit about how you finish it with mitered corners and binding.
Sounds good. Okay, so I have my quilt on this little mini quilt that I've got. And this is another
cute.
Jemima Flint. She's an Australian quilter. She did this for me, and I just love it. This is all paper pieced. But what you'll notice is I've got my binding started. So with the binding, basically all it is, you take your cotton. This is if you make your binding. You can buy binding as well, but it's just 2 inches. You fold it, and then what you want to do, if you're going to hand stitch it, I suggest stitching your binding onto the front, okay? So you stitch your binding onto the front if you're going to hand stitch, because what you're ultimately going to do is flip it over and then you'll hand stitch in the back, and that's what these little clips are for when you do that.
So
that way
handy.
you can go in and you can actually just hand stitch right along there. Or a lot of people don't like hand stitching, so they want to just quilt it all. So then if you're going to do that, I suggest doing it the other way, because then you can, when you are quilting it, if you do that, you'll be able to see your seams, because you want the front to look a little better than the back, because you probably might have a little overlap if you're trying to sew it that way. So one of the things that you'll notice is that you've got these nice corners here, and I've already done some for you. These are called mitered corners, and you guys probably use that in garment sewing as well. Okay, so what you do, I'll snag this one over here. This one looks nice and clean. What you'll notice is it kind of overlaps like that, and then this is the ultimate effect that you're gonna get.
Oh, that's
so you do
nice and
that.
tidy.
Yep. and then it kind of crosses over. But in order to do that, that's what you're looking for. All right, so what you do when you're sewing is you're gonna have it on your machine. I figured this would be easier to demo not on the machine for the first time at least.
Absolutely.
And then
let's just see how it works.
what you're gonna do is I'm gonna eyeball it about 1/4 of an inch. You wanna put your pin there, okay? And you just sew in a straight stitch right around onto that. You're going to sew straight up to that 1/4 inch, and then all you're gonna do is just turn it on your machine and go right off that corner. So you've almost got kind of like a little check where it comes in and goes up, okay? Once you've got that, I'm gonna pin it there for now since we didn't sew it. What you're gonna do is you take this, turn it this way, so you've got that kind of facing forward. It's easier if you just flip it straight up so you can kind of see what you're doing. Hold that, and then just bring it straight down. And then all you're gonna do is you have to take it off the machine in order to do this when you're quilting, but then start up at the top there and just keep going straight down. So, and that gives you those nice clean corners.
That's not too complicated.
No, not at all. It's a little fumbly, so I think if you practice it a couple times, you'll get it. But that's it. So that's, there's a lot of ways to, see how to completely finish it, but that'll get you started at least on your binding. And, I personally love to hand stitch, so this is my preferred method to do it.
Got it. That was super helpful. Thank you, Ginger.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, we covered a lot of ground today.
Yes, we did.
I'm ready to make another quilt. We shared a couple of tips for piecing. We talked about stitch in the ditch. Went over mitered corners. Like, you could pretty much make a quilt now, right?
That's right. You got all the knowledge.
Love it.
Nice. And so show me guys, I want to see what you guys have done already.
Sure.
So Kate, what is this?
This is a bag I made for an issue of Sew It All. I believe we called it the typographic tote because it's got this cute little typographic font. It's some basic strip piecing with, as you can see, I quilted on either side of the seams. And then there's some quilting on the various edges as well. And then finished it off with an adorable little covered button that matches.
Oh, it's so much fun. Yeah, and it's such a great way to get started with quilting.
Definitely,
Absolutely.
especially if quilts themselves are not something you're really excited about. A quilted bag is a nice small project to start with.
And you can only make so many quilts. Like, honestly, like my poor family, they're like, no more quilts. But I love what Amanda has here too, because this is so on trend right now. There are so many quilted jackets out there.
This is the Tamarack jacket pattern by Grainline Studio with a couple of mods because I can't ever do anything straight to the pattern. But this is also a really great place to start if you're not that excited about making a full-size quilt, and if you want to just try a really basic quilting technique. There's no piecing here. These are just flat pieces of fabric that I've come in and done a straight line stitching on. Really fun, really easy project, super warm and lightweight. I love this coat so much. And I believe you've made one too, right, Kate?
I have, and I went with a little bit more complicated version. Mine is pieced, and I quilted it with machine embroidery.
So fancy.
And
It's beautiful.
And yes, and then I did a whole lot of details on this guy that I'm really proud of. So you can see lots of options for this particular pattern.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for letting me
thank
join
you.
the lab. This was great.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of your quilting knowledge and enthusiasm. I'm so inspired.
Definitely.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Stitch Lab, and be sure to join us next time.